We're both 40 this year.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger,
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today. It's
It's a slogan we should put on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift.
Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
G'day, Roger.
Andy, how you doing?
Pretty good. Did you know that the ABC, the Australian Broadcast Commission, so the equivalent of the BBC to those outside of Australia, costs the average Australian the equivalent of an annual Netflix subscription?
You mean like, what is it, 12 times, what is it now? Do you think it is $18 now?
I think well, that's an inherently complicated question because I don't think Netflix subscriptions are quite as simple as they were before. Did they have an ad version out?
I thought they had just like the whole standard definition, high definition thing.
Let's not get caught up in the details, but yes, the annual cost of what you would pay for a subscription to Netflix is, of course you don't pay for the ABC as a subscription, hence why we don't think of it in that way. It's a free thing that we have, but nonetheless, to the taxpayer, it's...
So you're saying that's the raw cost to cover production? Because if they were selling it, it'd be like twice as much then.
Like, that's the cost of the taxpayer. Like the equivalent of every single Australian having a Netflix subscription.
Yeah. No, I understand. But like, say if ABC was a streaming service, then they wouldn't be able to sell it at cost price. It would be like double that if you wanted to buy a subscription to the ABC.
I think if the ABC was a subscription service, no one would buy it.
I disagree. I definitely disagree. I think you would be left, like panning for gold, you'd be left with the most liberal inner city subscription base. It would be like, indistinguishable from some crazy, like, if you wanted to create an email list of all the people who love sourdough bread.
Okay, so the ABC has its streaming. I mean, it does have a streaming called iView. And as far as I'm aware, every single program from the ABC is on iView, apart from maybe some, weird ones where there's some rights issues, like for some content that's streamed elsewhere or something. But I'm pretty sure that, like, Netflix would have multiple times the market penetration on, like, devices than iView, even though iView's free.
I don't know, man. Bluey's pretty popular.
But what do you think about that? Like, last week we talked about Elon Musk and Doge. Like, wouldn't the ABC be the equivalent of, like, USA? Like, wouldn't that be the first thing that he cuts? Like...
I'm just trying to think, like, why there isn't a national broadcaster in America. Because that would be, like, the wildest thing ever. It would be so American, like, so American lame that it would be amazing. Yeah, of course it would be. But don't forget that it is kind of popular to kind of criticize the ABC continually, right? Like that always happens. And they're like, this should be slashed and scrutinized, and this is taxpayer dollars and things like that. So I think that's definitely a narrative that's out there, right?
On that point, look, I think, the actual justification for the ABC is much more narrow than, like, what it actually does. So we don't really need the ABC, like a taxpayer funded broadcaster, to, on our behalf, buy content from the UK and, like, put it on its broadcast channel. Like that, like, we don't need that. Like, there's plenty of free to air, like, commercial free to air networks that can do that. What we maybe do need the ABC for, or where the ABC, like, at least makes more sense, is, like, so regional communities getting local news that they wouldn't otherwise have access to, in multiple channels, not just on TV, like online as well, increasingly radio and so on. But, like, it's got like a $1.1 billion budget, right? But so much of that budget, or a significant proportion of that budget, isn't, like, dedicated to activities that most Australians sort of would say, I'm glad they do that, right? And I think there's probably 3 areas I'd say the ABC, like, should really concentrate on. I think one would be...
The Chaser.
Maybe when Trump comes. So, like, children's content, like, I think they've got, like, a unique position to be able to, like, service that market, because it's not commercial based, like, it's not ad driven. So you don't like, a lot of parents don't want that content in front of their kids. I think the next is cultural, like, supporting, not Australiana in some kind of like, we need, Sylvania Waters season 2 sort of thing, but like, TV shows that focus on like embedding culture or like treat culture as like a national asset. And then the third is local. It's like, I don't think they need to compete on like national news. Like, it's more the local news. It's more like, you know, the local council is going to close down like a critical service in a community. And yeah, I mean, you probably do want the ABC there to like shine a light when there's no, where the private sector can't deliver that focus.
Well, so, I mean, I guess that you raise an interesting point, right? Like if you stripped out all the entertainment aspects besides kids and you just made it like news and, Australian arts, I think that would be a very strong core proposition that people would get behind funding. I do think that there is a tendency when you talk to people that more and more so in this kind of crazy information landscape, to borrow some buzzwords, that someone like the ABC would be more needed than ever to be able to kind of have a reliable source of information for Australians, right? When there's so much like fake news and propaganda and different things out there that actually would serve as that. But it's pretty problematic trying to do that, right? Like trying to be the arbiter truth kind of, so to speak. So, because it's just, it's a very difficult task. And like you said, once you step out of local news and you're on the world stage and you're trying to sort things out, you need a big budget because you need actual journalists out there, right? And you need a big newsroom. And I think that's why it becomes quite challenging. And you see that. And then what are your thoughts? I'm keen on your thoughts of like stepping outside of news, but very adjacent things like Q&A, things like Media Watch, like the 7:30 report, all those kind of things, right? Like that are slightly more editorial based, but still very much about adjacent to journalistic kind of pursuits.
Q&A, absolute fail, crash burn, get rid of it. We don't need that in Australia anymore. No, like that's the shittest show on Australian. We just say like,
why is it popular though? Tell me what's popular.
I don't think it is popular. Honestly, it's not popular. Like come on, there's probably 20 times more people who tune into maths. When's Q&A? It always used to be on a Monday night. I don't know if that's changed.
It's Monday night.
Okay, so there's like probably 20 times more people who tune into maths, like Married at First Sight on Channel 9, than watch Q&A. And it's just full of suckholes. Like it's just the same people who want to clap. I mean, any reference to, whatever latest like inner city elite cause, because of course it's like always hosted in, in inner city like areas, fanboys.
So straight into the bin.
The other stuff like, I've never historically minded like, okay, there is no commercial business case for covering like national politics in the way that the ABC does. So none of the other networks do that. So I think you could argue that yes, an investment in that or a focus on that is warranted. But I think we're in the 21st century now, and the ABC seems to be like funded or set up on a 20th century model, right? It's like this idea that it's like a broadcaster, right? You have this, you have your allocation of spectrum and then you get the right to broadcast on that spectrum to every household in Australia. And we'll throw in a few radio stations. But like, that's such a like 20th century model. We're way past that. Like, why doesn't the ABC, for example, have some partnerships with like other content vehicles? Like, why doesn't it say, look, YouTube, we want to partner with you and we want to, like, we're just going to pump out like content on YouTube. And like the deal is we're going to do it. We don't want you to pay us and we'll pay you some money to host our content, but we don't want you to put ads on the, like, I don't know, like or they can do that with Netflix, or they can do that even with like the existing commercial networks. Like there's so many ways they could think outside the box and deliver on their mandate without having this stilted channel.
Andy, this is like asking why doesn't the Vatican endorse polygamy? Like, this is not the institution that's going to go down that road and start making YouTube shorts, right? Like it's
well, to your point from last week, we need cultural change.
Well, I thought that that Fox guy was the Murdoch guy was going to do that.
Oh, I'm glad you brought him up, Kim Williams. So, if you remember a couple of months ago,
you were defending him.
Yes, I was defending him at the National Press Club. He made comments to the effect: people like Mr. Rogan prey on people's vulnerability. They prey on fear. They prey on anxiety. They prey on all of the elements that contribute to uncertainty in society. A few others, but
he had a personal attack on Rogan as well.
Yeah, well, it was.
What did he call him? Vile.
He's repulsed. I think he said, "I'm repulsed by it." Not necessarily Joe Rogan, but that model, right? He was saying. I can't even remember when we had the conversation, but when we did, I was sort of defending Kim Williams, And actually, the reason I wanted to bring this up, and you brought it up, so that's good. Maybe to give you an opportunity to, because you were sort of maybe like saying that's a bit too harsh. Are your views the same on that as they were when we discussed it 7 minutes ago?
I know what you're getting at, but I'm going to hold the line. And the reason I'm going to do that is that I believe that I have looked inside the heart of Joe Rogan. What I see is an innocent. So I don't actually see him being of bad character. In maybe what some people want to do to kind of bend his platform and his actions, somehow construe a level of like maliciousness or wanted kind of neglectful damage that he's projecting out into the world. And I don't really see that. Like, I don't really buy it. And I think he hasn't really changed over his career. I actually don't think that he hasn't been radicalized. I don't think he's changed his interests. So I'm gonna have to stand by that.
All right. Can I ask you, how often do you listen to the Joe Rogan Experience, or how much of the Joe Rogan Experience in, say, the last 3 months?
Not much. Maybe like I've listened to, one episode every 6, maybe.
All right. So I have now formed a view and opinion that Joe Rogan is malicious, either because he is being completely irresponsible and like neglectful, but even now I'm not sure if he's actually being like intentionally malicious. And I would probably, I mean, if you asked me 2 years ago, I wouldn't for a second question anything you just said. But ever since the Trump endorsement, or ever since the sort of having Trump on or whatever, I don't know, like I think he's on the take or something. Like, I don't want to say that because the guy's like a millionaire and can sue the shit out of me, but like...
No, but also for that reason, why is he on the take?
Well, because he's just become such an acolyte, like not just for Trump, but like for just the most extreme right-wing kind of nonsense. Like, and sorry, when I say right-wing, that's probably not even the way to put it. The most extreme conspiratorial nonsense. Like, I think Joe Rogan, when he was like on the whole like anti-vax stuff, like I think that was probably, like you were saying, from a place of sort of innocence, or he has his sort of worldview and like it didn't align with like, but from him that was just him. That was his view. And, you can't deny him the right to have that view. But I did listen to an episode of him with Brett Weinstein. I won't go into, who all these characters are, but like he's one of these figures who's like really smart, but like he's been sort of captured by the algorithm. Like he's become crazy, but because he's smart, he's able to make crazy shit sound intellectual.
Yeah.
There's this like cast of people who do this where they, for whatever reason, like maybe clicks and views and likes and money, and they're smart people, but I don't know if and it's still hard to say, like, do they start believing it because they're like captured by a cult or something and they genuinely do believe what they're saying, but they can't see like the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
Or are they just like, I want the money? But I think Joe Rogan, listening to him with Brett Weinstein, like it was just beyond the pale. Like it was Joe Rogan,
all right,
growing out with him.
I'll let you go for a little bit, Andy. You got to give me something. You got to give me just give me a taste of something to kind of help me. What does he not believe? Does he believe like AIDS was a government project, or what is it like? What's the kind of thing?
It was around the time of the JFK confirmation and
RFK.
RFK, and they're talking about this. Okay, so did you see like the Bernie Sanders thing on the like accepting donations from pharmaceutical companies?
The biggest kind of recipient of donations from the pharmaceutical industry in his... Yeah.
So like basically, what happened is Bernie Sanders was pushing RFK on like that he was accepting, or he could potentially accept donations after, or he could earn profits or something from decisions he's made in his position, like post being in office, right? And then what happened is RFK turns it around and says like, oh, but you were the biggest, you accept, I can't remember exactly what the line was, but it was something to imply that Bernie Sanders was like dodge, right? Accepting donations. And Bernie Sanders went livid because it was a complete misrepresentation of his actual, like the nature of like his fundraising. So the fundraising for Bernie Sanders, it had come from employees within the healthcare sector, right? Not from the big corporate interests, right? Which is the point. And So Bernie Sanders goes livid back at RFK. Anyway, it's this whole thing. You can go and look. But you've got Joe Rogan and Brett Weinstein like talking about that in such bad faith, like not presenting that as it actually occurred, but just was like saying, oh, Bernie Sanders, yeah, you should have heard him at this hearing. He's just like, oh, he's on the take from big pharmaceutical companies. And they're like...
Rogan supports a lot of what Bernie Sanders does. Though.
No. But they were wanking out on how dodgy and corrupt Bernie Sanders was, right? In a way that just didn't ring true. It was just partisan. Like it was the Trump line. Like it was the Trump campaign team line. Like, so anyway, that's one example. But the whole thing was just this love fest. And it's like, you know how when we talked about how sometimes Rogan just acquiesces the guest, like he indulges the guest in the areas that he knows that they're like interested in, to give them enough rope to hang themselves or to make them sound silly or to make it more interesting and lively. Like, it was like he was doing that all episode, only that like he was the one saying it. He was the one saying the stupid shit. So anyway, that's my view on Rogan. So he's dead to me.
Oh, man.
I'll still watch his comedy specials.
Again, you know, I don't know if, like, I need something a little bit harder, Andy. Like,
we'll just listen to it. Like,
but
honestly,
the way you
like,
describe
form your
him is
own
like
view.
malicious. Like,
I think so. Well, in my opinion, he's crossed the threshold now where he's like, maybe before you could say, he's like probably made some missteps, but like, to your point, he's just like, he's not deliberately doing it, and it's just like, hey, he's 3 hours on the air shooting shit, right? Like there's gonna be a lot of stupid shit said, right? And maybe that's what you could have said previously about him, to say, all right, he's okay, but just treat it with a grain of salt. But now he's past that point now where he's just say, look, I've got the biggest podcast audience on the planet, or close to it, and I think he's completely irresponsible. And I think Kim Williams was right.
He's repulsive.
Yeah. Like these whole Trump, everyone in this Trump world and Trump aligned world are repulsive. Absolutely. 100%. All right. What are we talking about?
Yeah. Let me hit you with something. Okay. So I was at some work drinks the other day, and we got talking with a group of people, and I think someone in a different department started like having a chat about how he insinuating some level of discrimination against his race. Right, like from a career perspective, you know, that it was hard for this, and let's just say this person was of Asian heritage, and I won't say what kind of Asian, jungle Asian or not, or city Asian. Anyway, so we're talking, and then one of the ladies in the group was this like middle-aged Caucasian lady, and she kind of just like, I could tell that the conversation was making her uncomfortable, right? But I didn't realize why it was making her uncomfortable. And then after kind of like half the group left, she spoke up to myself and a few others that were still left there. And she spoke about how like that she often hears people talk about prejudice and like all this kind of, collective disadvantage when it comes to races, but no one ever understands ageism, and she experiences that. And she feels even worse than that, it's very hard to kind of talk about because she's white, right? And it got me thinking, you know, she kind of talked about how this idea of like how hard it is to find a job when you're over a certain age, and that you lose less and less cultural relevance, and people look at you different, like they look through you, and all these things that you just don't really think about because you're so used to hanging around people in your own bubble. And it really kind of changed my view a little bit that actually she is right. You know, like I think that age and aging, you know, Father Time comes for us all, and it happens so gradually, right? But it's also an inevitability, and you see it all around you. But there's almost this like wanted ignorance about not seeing the end, right? Not seeing the impact. And I do feel for them, because I know, especially being in a hiring situation too, it's 100% the case that older employees vying for the position have this kind of ageism aspect hanging over them. And you can tell it affects their confidence or whatever it is. So, you know, I wanted to kind of have a bit of a discussion about that. You know, like first of all, do you have any reactions about the setting? And like, I feel like this lady was quite brave even bringing it up, to be honest, because I think that it's definitely at odds with the culture at the moment.
Something in your language, you know, setting up like an us and them paradigm, as though there's us young people who are never going to get old, and those unfortunate people who have that special disability where they age and they get older every day. So I actually don't think it's, I feel sorry for them, or I acknowledge that of them, because I think actually, hey man, like, you know, we're both 40 this year, and 40 is probably the turning point of like of your career in some ways. And in that sense, we're going to be on like the old side of the career. So I think I've got a couple of reactions. I think age can be either this person is very experienced because of their all of the roles they've had throughout they're very experienced, they're reliable, they've got good judgment, they know how to handle themselves, they're mature, and they're going to be really great fit for this position. And that works when you're hiring, senior executive. You want like a subject matter expert, a lot of technical expertise in their very narrow field where age actually equals experience. But I think that the flip side is where you have certain kind of roles, maybe they're entry-level roles, maybe they're lower skilled roles, they're just anyone can do them. Then an older person applying for that role, like for one, they don't have the potential of it. So a lot of organizations want to give those roles to young people because they want to blood the next, like they want this workforce management, right? So they want to, train up the next generation of leaders in their business. So yeah, they don't want older people because those people aren't the future for that organization. And that's kind of a bit of an odd one now because like even young people stay in a job for like, not more than 5 years usually. So,
I was about to say,
yeah, like a 55-year-old will probably have as much potential as a 20-year-old. But anyway, let's park that. But even so, there's also a notion of like, if you're an older worker applying for, let's say, I don't say an entry-level job, but like a job requiring less experience, then there's a question of like, why is that person applying for this job? Like why? And I think that's where it comes into play. So I think some of that discrimination that, like in the labor market is a little bit more nuanced than just simply they're discriminated against. I don't think it's categorically different to the type of discrimination. Like to give a very practical example, if you have like a foreign sounding surname, and you've applied for a job, there are some surnames which will count against you due to unconscious sort of factors, right? And that's a different, like I don't think age is quite the same.
Yeah, well, there's better protections for age in a lot of ways, right? Like you can't tell straight away, like a name. But I'll kind of give you so here's a statistic, and this is from like National Civics Association. A 2021 survey found that 78% of people aged 40 to 65, and yes, we're approaching that category, had either seen or personally experienced age discrimination in the workplace. Isn't that like shockingly high for that age group?
I don't think it's shockingly high. Like, oh, sorry, what? Give me the number again.
78% of people had experienced age discrimination.
I think that's like saying, have you seen jobs go to the most, tertiary educated, and be like, it happens. Age discrimination can be like, if you're looking for a social media, manager, are you going to give it to like the 25-year-old or are you going to give it to the 65-year-old? Like, you can give it to the 25-year-old.
Well, I mean, you're assuming a lot of things, I guess.
Like for like, there's no way. Like, the 25-year-old is going to be like, beat the 65-year-old out of the buck, right? And that's particularly acute example because social media is like native
What if your
to
target market are 65-year-olds?
Yeah, but they still don't know how to like operate the Facebook and the Instacoin, right?
See, I think you can't, like, that is discrimination, right? Also, like the Facebook demographic age is like 60s.
Every factor that you use to decide who you want to hire, you're discriminating. So like you could say, oh, I got discriminated against because I don't have much experience, or I got discriminated against because I don't have skills or qualifications. Like that is just like, that's the nature of discrimination. So I think where we draw the line is we say, well, if you want to discriminate, it should be on inherent like merit-based factors, not on attributes that the person can't control. But at the same time, like we rely on heuristics as like people, like this is how the brain works, and there are certain red flags that like rule someone out and for certain jobs, and it's against the law to do that. But things like race should be religion, but for some certain positions you do want like open-minded like thinkers who can apply like a completely like malleable fresh perspective. Like you don't want people stuck in their ways, and unfortunately I think most people associate that trait with older people, and that's why you have age discrimination.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, man, because we are living longer and having longer careers. Like, how do you expect people to have longer careers if and hit you with another stat here, nearly half of recruiters consider applicants age 57 too old for a job?
Can I throw like the reverse proposition to you, and just to say that we talk about ageism like as though older people are discriminated against, but I think in some ways you can probably argue that across the whole labour market, older workers at least to a certain age. Maybe if you take off like people over 60, but if you go like under 60, you could probably say there's actually more discrimination against younger workers, because the presumption is that younger workers don't have experience, therefore they can't do the job, right? Or they're just
22.
I don't know if I'm 100% sold on this. Like, let's take someone over the age of 60 who's got lots of. I think they've got a really tough chance, and I think that is probably at play, right? Including like a presumption that they're just going to retire. All those factors hang over them, right? But like, I think there's probably more really highly competent younger workers who just don't have like the boxes on their like ticked boxes on their resume because they haven't had as much experience, that can't get the same jobs that like a more experienced and older worker can get, just because they're a more known quantity. And that's fine. Like, that's the employer's discretion to say, well, look, we're not going to take a risk on a person. So I'm not saying that it's like discrimination in like some kind of pernicious sense, but like I would say that in terms of competent young people who just have to go through the grind of like going up one level up the ladder, like they do have to in the rungs of the ladder. They can't go from step 1 to step 5. They've got to go through 2, 3 first.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. I mean, what about the next part of what she was saying, though, this lady, about saying that just losing relevance, like people looking through her. And it's something that you hear. It's a good way to describe it in a lot of ways, that you start to become a little bit invisible. And I think some of that is the probably accentuated more with a female, like an older woman, because you lose a little bit of, I suppose, power there from your appearance and your kind of sexual currency and things like that. There's a bit more of an emphasis on it, I suppose, in terms of that aspect between the genders. But yeah, I do feel like, I don't know, I think sometimes I do wonder a little bit about our relationship with the elderly.
We're not talking about geriatrics here. We're talking about, aren't we?
No, look, I'm going to paint a picture. So I'm talking about someone who is undeniably like older looking, right? So they usually have white hair, like pure white hair, or if no hair. They've got wrinkles going on. They're moving different. I think it's like that end of the scale is what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about visibly elderly now. And I just kind of think sometimes a society, like how defined should a society be about with their relationship to the elderly? Because that would be, I think, a key factor around some part of cohesiveness and how we kind of look after those like more vulnerable in our society. And I think that there's something there, right? Like when you look at different cultures, or you say you contrast it to a culture like an Asian culture, so to speak, or let's take a neutral one, away from me, to Japan maybe. They have a real respect for their elderly. Yet when you retire in Japan, the elderly do menial jobs, like before they get their pension and stuff. They like sweep the streets or like clean things or stamp tickets and stuff. So I don't know. It's just it's a strange thing in my mind. Like, do you think we have a good relationship with the elderly in Australia? There's a part of me that kind of does recognize that we don't have a good relationship, or the relationship with, that last stage of life isn't ideal in Australia. Like, I think that it's only going to get worse because we don't have the same institutions and kind of sense of community that we used to have, that was enforced by, we've talked about religion, churches and things, but even like the RSLs are kind of dying, where you might run into the white hair brigade, right? Like, I don't know. Where do you come across like the elderly in your day-to-day life nowadays?
The tricky part is like the family divide, right? So I think there's two models. Like, you can have like a model where older people, like, okay, you retire, right? And then you stop working, but you start doing you're playing different roles in your family. So maybe your kids now have kids, so you're a grandparent, and you might start doing things there, and you might be very integrated into like a multi-generational family, right? And I think that's one model.
Yeah.
And then I think another model is you live your best life, you fuck off the grandkids, and you just like play bingo, and I think that's kind of, I don't think that's necessarily like a bad thing. Like, I think it's good for older people to sort of have a second wind of life that isn't dependent on, some kind of duty to care for grandchildren or care for their children, continue to bankroll, man-child who've like failed to launch, sort of thing.
And it's going to make it. I just need another year. So going back to it, I mean, it's more just, and I have a different cultural aspect to this that let me just break into it. Okay, you've tried to you've described the two different models, right? I could describe it more as like those who feel a sense of duty to their parents, perhaps in the last stages of life, in terms of personally looking after them, and those that feel maybe that you don't need to do that personally, but perhaps you need to make sure they end up in a nice situation, whether that be like a nursing home that's decent or whatever it is, right? And I think those are maybe like, that's probably quite a hard divide, I think, because the views on that probably separate a lot of ideology and maybe represent a cultural aspect as well. But I think you could split people into that spectrum, right? And there might be a few that say, oh, look, I'll look after my parents until they need specialized care or whatever. And at that point, we might need to discuss, like, can we afford to get a nurse in, or do they need to go to somewhere with, care? But yeah, I mean, it's a bit of an awkward topic, but don't you think that divides something? Like, you can see those two divides in the people that you mix with, or the family, like the families that you know?
No, I actually don't think that divide is as sharp as I think what you've made it out to be. I think there's possibly a difference culturally from a housing point of view, because I think it's maybe more common in immigrant communities for there to be multi-generational households as a fact of life, particularly when you consider what an immigrant circumstance actually is. So contemplate this for a moment, right? You're a migrant to a country like Australia. You've set up your home here. You have elderly parents who are still in whatever said country that you've come from, and you kind of have realized that you maybe need to bring them out. So you bring them out. That person doesn't have housing. So that tends to happen is in that living in care situation tends to happen for pragmatic reasons as much as like cultural reasons. Then you can go back and you click like, certainly like, I mean, in China, you have a similar thing, but again, it's like, it's a pragmatic, like this is
so you
this
kind
is
of
an
put
efficient.
more weight onto the economics of it.
I think that leans into whatever cultural factors, like that reinforces whatever cultural factors exist, right? But then if you look at, okay, but then what's the alternative, right? Well, probably what tends to happen is if you're an older person, you will be living in your own property. That's your choice. So it's not like your children have declined you care or something. Like, you want to be as independent as you can. You maybe have a degree of privilege in that you can live at home. It's not like you want to go and live with your children. Like, that's not necessarily what you want. It's not what you want for yourself. It might be for some people, but it's not for everyone. And you get to the same crunch point that you just talked to where, all right, yep, we'll have them live with us. We'll look after them and care for them, do basic stuff for them for as long as we can within our home and all that stuff, until we can't do it anymore. Until, hey, we've both got to go to our jobs and no one's home to care for this person throughout the day and they need care for the day. And the only way we can actually provide safety and security to this person is to organize some sort of formal care for them. And I think that same crunch point happens no matter what, like whether they're living independently or they're living, in homes. So I don't actually think it's an ideological split in the way you've put it. I think it's I actually think it's probably like doesn't recognize the agency that older people have, and in fact that most older people don't want to like receive care, like, to begin with. They don't want, especially from their children. Like, often that's some sort of like, I mean, ultimately they still care for their children and they don't want to be a burden to their children.
Isn't that the ideology that I'm talking about?
No, I don't think so, because I think
burden rather than actually like.
No, because I think that it's the same shit. Like, no, don't need help even when they clearly do. Like, so I think that's a pride thing. I think that's people coming to terms with the fact that they're not what they once were. I think that's a sense of like coming to the realization that you're entering a period of your life that is the end of your life, like eventually, essentially, and not wanting to kind of concede that. So I think that's where it becomes complicated and nuanced. But I definitely don't think it's like, I would really strongly push back against some notion that it's like, oh, you've got the people who care about older people and the people who don't care. Like, it's not that at all. Yeah.
No, I think I totally agree with that. But I do think that there is a big difference, and it's not just from the kids to the parents. It's from the parents down too. It's this notion that you are a burden, right, versus something around, no, this is like this is actually a plus for the family, or it's it's my way of respecting my parents or whatever. So I think it's on both sides, and I do agree that if the parents as they age want that sense of independence and they don't, and that's what they're chasing, then I get that. Like that's part of the culture. That's all I'm pointing out. There's a different maybe expectation as well. I mean, what would you want when you like? Do you ever see yourself wanting to live?
Yes.
wanting to live with your the younger generation?
I think I've got two phases of like I've got the freedom phase when like the kids are grown up and, you know, out of the house, or at least adults, so such that my job's done. And there's like, yeah, I can go like travel the world. I can do all of that, you know, and still young and still healthy. And that, I don't know, I think that phase probably goes up to, you know, up to probably 80 years old, I reckon, from retirement to when you probably have, it's probably even before retirement, you're still in the workforce, you know, 65 or, yeah. So probably that period, like, no, I don't know that I want to be like changing nappies again, you know, I want to, I want to help out, and I want to be still like maintain like close family bonds and all that. But like, I don't necessarily want to retire from one job and then start another. Like I want to sort of it has to be on my own terms. I don't want another boss. And then I think when you then speak to like the second phase, like I think, yeah, like you do, like family is critical. Like at that age, particularly, probably that's the thing that's going to sustain you in the final phase of your life, right? So I think that's how I'd see it. I don't think, to answer your question specifically, like live in, like I don't actually see that as necessary. Like I think you can be pragmatic about it, but like I think I would live close. I think I would want to, you know, be in regular contact, like, you know, close by, you know, like I think live-in is, like I said before, I think it can be a convenience in many situations. So it can be like, this is the convenient way for us to structure our lives for whatever reason. But like, I don't think it's necessarily something I would want to aspire to.
Yeah, I guess you want the option. You don't want that option to be like, because part of getting older is a sense of vulnerability in many aspects, and you don't want to only have those options that you're relying on kids to take care of you, otherwise you're fucked. That's like a bad situation to be in. But at the same time, like I think that being part of, you know, tied in and having that circle kind of like close in on itself is very seductive to me. And I do think that there's something very magical about the way that, you know, grandkids kind of infuse like almost like a blood transfusion for grandparents. And I kind of see it time and time again where it just, you know, there's just something very poetic about the two stages of life meeting. And it seems to just benefit, like it's just one of those situations where 1 + 1 = 3, right? And I'm not just talking about the free childcare, because nothing's really free, but it's more just like the vitality. And there are studies to back all this up as well.
I think it's about meaning, right? It's about giving like older people, like you retire from your job, which for most people gives them meaning, and then that goes, and it's like, okay, sweet, we'll go and like have a bit of fun or whatever, go travel the world and all that, and then for like a period of time you sort of enjoy that, and that probably lasts a couple of years. You probably get 3, 4, 5 years out of that, and then eventually you're like, my life doesn't have any meaning, and that's the bit that I think that answers. But you know, I want to maybe pivot this a little bit to like, I think we've discussed like two elements of like ageism, one being in the workforce, the second being like more older Australians and older people, how they're treated. But like, I want to come back to like the age-old boomer debate, right? Because I think the way that different generations get cast as like the enemy, you know, the generation that fucked everything. Like, I actually think that's kind of...
You think that's where the animosity...
Some of the stuff that happens in that space is like, it's just overtly like offensive and like disparaging. It's just that like age is not, you know, doesn't warrant the same.
Yeah. It's hard, right? Like, I think that we are older millennials, right? So our parents are boomers, and I think that we are primed to see the good in it, compared to maybe like younger millennials. I don't know. And as you get older and you realize how much of a shit show parenting is, you have a lot more empathy as you grow older. But I do agree that probably this divide in the housing situation especially is not good. It's for fostering, you know, good feelings between the generations, and more probably has to be done in that respect. And But I guess that maybe that's what I'm talking about too, right? Like I think that there's going to be a real transfer in the next 10 years.
No, man, they're all going to blow it on cruises.
Yeah, transfer 2.0. But how do we handle that as a society, right? Like, and then we're going to have to take the reins sooner or later.
I just think there's not enough recognition that like boomers actually went through really tough periods. Like, and I think that it can be simultaneously true at the same time that young people are hard done by, and in some ways, as a collective kind of society, we've not delivered them the same level of prosperity, at least in this particular dimension, as we all inherited. And that can be true, but it can also be true that, fuck no, like a boomer in a house that worked their butt off their whole lives, that didn't have fucking cafes on the corner and avocado and toast and a coffee every day, deserves their house, you know? Like, both of those things can be true. Maybe we need more multi-generational house.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing our part, the ethnics. But in all seriousness, like, it is more than just economic, right? Like, I think that it is a different attitude towards that. Maybe it's born of that, but it's different. And I think it's this view of like what is yours, like what you've sacrificed to achieve. Like, I think it's more a symptom of that narrative.
If you're a young person, like frustrated, maybe just be a bit more kind to your, I don't know, your grandparents or your or your parents. They got their house, but they had to work hard for it. And honestly, that house probably was pretty shit. Like when you go and like you look at realestate.com.au or domain and you see the worst possible like house that you can possibly see, just remember that's like how the houses, like that's how the best houses were when humans were buying. Just be kind, and maybe, yeah, like, hey, you know, the shop's closed at 12 o'clock on a Saturday.
That's my message too, and I think hire some old people. Where's you know, I was looking at the it's Pride Month at the moment, and I was looking at the flag, and it's got everyone under the sun. I don't think it has old people, and I'm wondering, it's a matter of time until they have their own stripe on that masterpiece.
Sure is. All right.